All right. So as I said, thank you for coming in to join our conversations about conservation. This is a event that we do every month during the frozen season here at the Upper Sugar River Watershed Association. We've had some great guests, and we do archive them as we come along on our YouTube channel. So look forward to this in your inbox, and you can check out our previous work there as well. My name's Matt. I am the Invasive Species Program Manager at Upper Sugar. I'm going to say Upper Sugar because it's a long name that we love, and it's very factual, but Upper Sugar for the case of the event, and also that is our website, uppersugar.org. I will reference that again at the end of this part of the talk. Before we move on to Q&A, we do have some events coming up to get you involved. Brief outline of where we're going with this today, talking about biocontrol in general as a concept, looking at purple loosestrife as we have it here in the state, and a bit about the program itself. So you're going to see a little beetle here, which is in fact the Eurasian beetle. That is the kind of the star of the show as we get involved today. So purple loosestrife, and these are some pictures. You can see this purple margin along the edge of this water body. It's really, really thick, and it's been here for a while, since the 1800s. You can see a bit about what it likes to live in. At this point, it has not much in the way of native predators to it, and it can become a huge issue in our wetlands. So looking at it this way for some ID, so we can get an idea what we're looking at, has this very square stem to it. It is opposite, if you know your opposite versus alternate. So the leaves come out at the opposite sides of each other, and they kind of branch in that symmetrical way right there. Really beautiful purple flower, as you can see. Usually 5 to 6 stems on there, or 5 to 6 petals on each one of those. And then it has this overwintering look that you can see out in your wetlands with these thick seed heads, and each plant can make, as it says here, 1 to 3 million seeds. So very prolific setter, and the seeds will float around on top of other flood events and in your lakes and streams to spread itself by that pathway. Anyway, anywhere you can find it, swales, islands, lake shores, riversides, whatever it is, it loves to keep its feet wet. So we got biocontrol going on here, and here's some other examples of what biocontrol looks like in our backyards. With barn owls, working on ground squirrels, and having kind of a combination of a food web there. Other things you can see here. So we're going to move into biocontrol, talking about that invasive plant, purple loosestrife, with one of its own nemesis, the Eurasian beetle, as I mentioned earlier, that little brown beetle. This is a picture of what the beetle will do to purple loosestrife and the seed masses you will find if you have a successful biocontrol program. So they're out there, they're eating, and they're laying their seeds with some frass, a little bit of caterpillar poop on top. Very distinctive to that species. So it's become a huge problem all across the United States. You can see here, this is a purple loosestrife map from 2020. So we're not alone in this fight and in this programming. And in Wisconsin, we do have a record of it in every single county in the entire state. And in fact, our organization helped find some of the first and report the first stands in the driftless region, and are doing control around that work. So just a few more pictures of it as we get into it. You can see what we're looking at. This big bush, this very attractive spikes of purple flowers, and you can see some dense infestation here with Joe Pye weed over here on the side, but a lot of these purple stalks sticking up, and quite able to keep its feet wet and grow into a bog, which is why it's an issue for our rivers and wetlands. It can change the hydrology and outcompete our native plants, and because it's not edible by our other native insects and other species, it takes up the resources without giving back to the ecology of the region. A bit more about biocontrol. You can see there's a couple caveats here that we're going to talk about. So I call it Garicella beetles. These are different types of these things. And luckily, we do have the ability to do this in the state. It is very regulated as far as how we can make this happen. And you can't just get any beetle. And people often ask, well, so is the cure going to be worse than the actual cause? So are these beetles going to cause damage to off-target species? The answer is we really don't think so. It's been a statewide recognized program for a long time, and it's been well researched. So it's still not complete control. And so something that even establishing these biocontrol refugia to help manage these populations is not a one and done deal. So we're going to continue to do this year after year inside of our systems. So as we're talking about what we can even do, so we've got this guy. This is the man Brock Woods who brought this project to us, to the state, and he's been doing this for a long time. Recently retired, so you can see his work here as he's been doing his doctorate research and ended up getting this approved to do control. This is a dense slide, but I'm just going to go through the top parts of it here. What do we do in the whole process of it? We're going to want to plan our dig, do that in February to March. We've got in April, it depends upon your region, we're going to do this in March in our area. You do a spring dig, get those pots planted up. You're going to add the beetles to them in mid-May when the beetles are popping. You will watch and maintain the plants as you grow them, and then you will do a beetle release in the late part of the summer so that you can then control that species. As we're talking, back to this, as we're talking about planning your biocontrol endeavor, not all sites are suitable to biocontrol. So this is a new publication that just came out this week, in fact, about how to think about when you can do biocontrol at a site. So if it's low density, sometimes you're better off, if you can see the low density there with low coverage, biocontrol is not going to work because you need to have enough plants around each other to foster a community and to have overwintering of the larvae in the soil. So without that, you might as well just get out there and dig it out of the ground, use your pesticides with an approved permit if it's wet, or cut them down repeatedly and tire them out. As you go up the scale from medium to high density, it becomes more of a viable option. So once you have a high density site with a large amount of coverage, really biocontrol can become your only option if you have a large population. So that's just before you get involved. Sometimes with this biocontrol program, you might be better off just getting out a sharp shovel and digging them out of the ground and refilling those holes with some native plants versus going through all the issues of raising beetles. So now back to what we do, back to the plan, back to the whole process. And who does this? All kinds of people. So we always need help for making sites available, for raising beetles, for sewing nets, getting out there and doing the digging itself. It's a whole statewide program, so we actually share beetles with other places and make that part of our network activity for the helping out the state. You can see we need sewing done, and we could use donations of supplies for making big cages or nets or soil for the projects. All of our partners could, but we always support that kind of stuff. So here's a nice visual look at what we're doing here for biocontrol, step by step. You're going to dig that rootstock. You're going to go ahead and take it and stick those things in kiddie pools. Usually that's what we've been using for years. You can use a mass rearing cage, which I'll show again in another picture, but you net them up, you put those big old nicely potted plants into, keep their feet wet, let them get nice and tall. At a certain point in the season when the beetles pop, you collect those beetles and you introduce them to these little purple loosestrife plant condos. Idea being they now have a safe place to grow and lay eggs and munch and continue their generational cycle. If you don't have nets on them, these things are like the Garicella beetles, they're little brown M&Ms, really. The sparrows love them, the frogs love them, the daddy loglegs love them. I see just huge amount of things ready to eat them. And as they get released in their kiddie pools. So they are definitely, they're not toxic. They're pretty good food source for our native plants and animals. So that's part of the positive thing about this too, is that we're turning these plants that nothing else knows how to eat into these Paracella beetles, which everything pretty much knows how to eat. So you can see it as this goes on, you eventually have a net that is full of these adults and larvae, and that we will put these things out back into the swamp from whence they came to devour their neighbors. So you can see the kind of the growth cycle here, and a little bit of an idea. Again, remember looking at this, you've got this very square stem, these very opposite leaves, a little even tinge of kind of purple in there as these shoots come up. And they get nice and tall. When you do this, you're going to want to fix your nets to a wire or something to keep them tall, so they're not themselves by their weight suppressing the growth or cutting off too much light to the plant. The time comes, you've got beetle release, and some folks get out there in their canoes. You can, we often just move them down to the sites that we already have ready to go with good access, and put them. You actually intertwine the flowering stalks and the plant with their neighbors. So in those medium density sites, you spread them around and encourage the larvae to grow over onto the other plants. So they have a little bridge and they keep munching, and the life cycle is such that they will eventually eat the plants and then lay more eggs and then crawl into the soil to overwinter, and they will then spawn again in the spring. What do we need for this? We've got, people like to use pitchforks. I'm a shovel or pick kind of guy. You're gonna want some waders out there. The netting we provide here, and the state does provide, but we can always use folks that like to sew to make these kind of socks. 3 to 5 gallon pots that we get donated from clients. Thank you, clients, are doing that this year and last year as well. These kiddie pools and some high quality Nutri-Grow potting soil, stuff that's going to be easy to get the nutrient rich feel of kind of a mucky swamp. So you want a lot of nutrients in there. They like to have their high quality fertilizer and whatnot. And for collecting beetles, this is a fun little trick too if you're doing this project, which is to say you can make a trap out of a 2 liter or 1 liter or whatever size plastic bottle. You just cut the top off, you flip it over, you tape it so they can't get out, and then you have a nice little area that you can just knock the beetles off and they can't get out. And if you put a little stopper in there of cotton swabs, they will be in there for a while until you can get them into a bag. Once you put them into a bag, you're going to want to go ahead and put some fresh cut purple loosestrife fronds in there to add humidity and for the beetles to eat as they're getting transported. So that's one way to do it. Also, you can use an aspirator, which is this little sucky tubey thing that you kind of pop. You suck on the tube and you put the beetles into the little container, and then you can have 10, 20 into a little container and put those right on the plants if you have them already ready to go in their purple loosestrife net condos. So, reminder that this is a restricted species. We're in our 40s, so you will need to get a permit if you want to do this. So we have that as an association, and our partners also get these often. So something to talk about. You're going to see some content information for Jeannie Shear, who runs this program in the state as of 2022. So you can ask through that portal or just ask Jeannie Shear through the UW extension program, and she can get you on your way. It's not that bad of an application, and she's great to work with. So this stuff does work. You can see kind of a before and after here. So it doesn't kill the plant entirely, but it really knocks it down from being 6 feet tall to 3 feet tall, and probably from 3 million seeds to just a few 100,000 seeds. So it's something that you can then follow up with digging and pesticides if you wish, or cutting to weaken the plant and remove it from a population once you get it under control with the biocontrol. So we do have an event coming up here. Come learn with us on March 22nd from 4 to 6. So register at our events page here at uppersugar.org. And it is also part of our project with the South Central Invasive Partnership, which is a SISMA. It's a organization. It's a cooperative invasive species management area that we work with as an association as well. So get your hands dirty. I'm always available for more contact about this, if you want to do a site or get involved to come out and do some patrol or want advice about what you're doing on your site. And again, Genie Shear is a great statewide contact for this if you are tuning in from outside of our watershed. And with that, I've got some dogs, got some kiddie pools, and I'd like to offer out the floor to see what other people think about this. If you're wanting to join along, or if you have other questions about the plant or the life cycle, I'm happy to answer those questions right now. So thanks for coming, and feel free to unmute and get your video on, and let's have a conversation about this project. That's what we're here for. I got a question from Robert here. It says, considering the large number of invasive wetland organisms, where does PL rank? Yes, okay, a good question, Robert. So what he's driving at is we have a lot of invaders to our region when it comes to different types of invasive species that are NR40 restricted. If they're NR40 restricted or prohibited, it means they've been deemed economically or environmentally harmful to the state. So purple loosestrife, what does it do? It's nice to get these things out of a moral quandary and say, it's not good, it's not bad, it's as opposed to what? So what does having purple loosestrife in a wetland do? Having seen the growth cycle of this, it's a very aggressive, woody shrub that can make a woody shrub-like system in a place that doesn't otherwise have that impact. So willows, you see shrub cars moving in, you see our native plants and dogwoods, things like that, that will kind of hold the soil and make these kind of wetlands happen. But purple loosestrife could be much more on the edge of wetness and the ability and dryness too. So basically you can have these really high degree of high density sites where there's almost nothing else growing if left unchecked. So for that reason, I think it's pretty serious. It can also displace grazing areas for our livestock. So it's not poisonous, but with mowing, and once it gets to a certain size, you can't really mow it with just a regular mower. So you have to come through it, knock it down with a larger machine or with a pair of loppers or whatever it is. So it's restricted. So that means that it's very prevalent. And that's an NR40 kind of saying. It's very prevalent. We'd like to control it, but we'll never eradicate it. So it's a great project to do for the right populations, and it's a good thing to take care of when you can, but it's not a prohibited species. So if it was prohibited by NR40, it would actually be like a layer above as far as response and priority. So it's like kind of right in the middle, I would say, for how that works for our kind of prioritization for wood planning.
And Matt, kind of a sort of a little different question, but I know a few years ago, I read a study on Eurasian milfoil, which, is problematic and just, millions and millions of dollars in trying to control it, eradicate it. And one of the things that the study found is that in some sites, Eurasian milfoil was declining on its own and being replaced by northern milfoil. And so are you aware of any examples where purple loosestrife is declining on its own, or does it just continue to spread unchecked?
To the best of my knowledge, it mostly depends. It'll be in a matrix of other invasives. So I've definitely seen it where it will be outcompeted by Phragmites coming in, and reed canary grass are both really tough for it. So it'll in fact live in a matrix. Those things will kind of choke it out, but they're also invasive. In high quality areas, it seems to overall slow down native regeneration in wetland systems, from what I've seen with my eye out there. So, and once you have an infestation, it doesn't really go away. And we're definitely on the rise. In fact, these last few years, we've had really good conditions for it to thrive, which is to say high water flood events. And so that's moving the seed base into new areas and new ponds where it was otherwise not connected but with those large flood events, it's able to establish in these kind of more far-flung wet areas. And it's on the rise in Dane County for sure. You can see these big blocks of it. So it's kind of comes in waves, and the biocontrol is the same way. So the biocontrol becomes more fashionable, and we do more of it, and it goes away. Like in the 90s, it really ramped up. We saw a lot of purple loosestrife, and then the biocontrol got strong, and then now there's been kind of a shift over time, and it's back on the rise from what I can tell from partners talking about it, or even Jeannie Shearer being like, boy, it's been a really really good time for purple loosestrife to grow, which is not good for us, but it's just, you can see it happening. Thanks for the questions. Other questions out there from folks?
Matt,
Doug.
this is Doug Maxwell, and I'm a town supervisor in the town of Rona, and one of the big concerns our citizens always have are stormwater management facilities. And do you ever see purple loosestrife coming into those? So I was asking primarily because we get a lot of cattails moving in.
Sure.
But I've never seen purple loosestrife yet, but I'm just wondering if that happens.
So cattails are going to be more of an emergent and actually in full standing water, where in general, purple loosestrife is right on the edge and can take some seasonal flooding, but doesn't necessarily want to be as wet as cattails. And hybrid cattail, as they're a real thug for invasive species too. They're really hard to deal with. So out here in Madison area, McFarland has a big complex of retention ponds, and there is purple loosestrife out there. So they definitely have some. So if it's very, very wet though, it's not going to be able to do it. So it's when I see cattails, they grow right next to each other. So it kind of depends just how seasonally inundated it is. It can definitely be a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, other questions? Nothing in the chat. You can also type them in the chat if you would like to compose your thoughts in chat form. Any other people? Lots of questions could come up about the life cycle and how the process is. So if that was not clear, I moved through that too quickly, feel free to ask particular questions about how that works.
Yeah, Matt, could you expand on that? Because I'm not sure how fast it reproduces from egg to egg.
I don't know the exact periodicity, but I think it's only a few weeks. I think it's pretty fast from the time in the growing season. You could have multiple generations that are popping off, they really go. They peak and then they go away. So there's a lot of timing. So we have this. Getting a message from Jacob. He wants to come join us for our dig day, which is great. And so we're kind of putting a bid in that we're going to be thawed out by then, but the whole pulses do come according to the spring season, and you cannot predict or change the spring season. So we want to dig there when they're not quite, the plants themselves are still sleeping before or just starting to pop out of the ground. The first sprouts are coming, and the ground is also then melted, so you can get out there in your wetlands and do the work. And then when the beetles hatch, they hatch in that mid-May period, and they have a number of generations over the course of the season. I wish I had an exact answer for you. That's a great question. How many weeks does it take for one life cycle to complete? We've got Robert on the job. He's a smart man, so he's our bird bug guy. So I'm sure probably by next Monday he might have an answer. We'll look it up too. I've never seen that information in a presentation, so I'm curious myself. But I know you can have multiple generations over the course of a season. So I think at least 3 to 4, which would imply that they're probably like every 3 weeks or so. And the more they have to eat, the better they do. So because sometimes I'll go back to my pond or have my kiddie pools, and they're just skeletons of what they were. So they eat them really fast, and if you have a lot of food, they can do more. So good question. I'll have to keep digging on that. Okay, Matthew asks, what is the release process for the larvae in the soil? Do you try to cover them with additional soil, and what about in a more marshy setting? Great question. The release, so the larvae are going to overwinter and crawl down into the soil. So in a very marshy setting, and this has been the case for other sites that never had great luck with this. if you have a very, very wet site that floods, you can't really do great biocontrol. If they don't have a kind of a muddy substrate that they can crawl down into, that they can overwinter in, if it's just wet all the time, the plants themselves can survive in a wetter situation than the larva can. So they're going to want to be able to get that highland. And so if you have a berm or kind of close to a large population, they can fly back and forth. The beetles can fly up to, they think, a mile to find other purple loosestrife sources as well. And they are obligate, meaning they only eat that to the best of our knowledge, and that's why they're unimproved biocontrol. So yeah, you do want to have a drier site for them. And I wouldn't say you want to cover them with additional soil necessarily. I think they, in a proper setting, they're going to be able to figure it out if there's a bit of soil out there. So they will often leave the pots out there for the season, so they can grow into the pots and have some soil that's already there, ready to go. So that in that way we kind of are adding more soil, but you don't want to. It's funny because it's a positive way to control invasive species, but it's also propagating invasive species. So at a certain point, as you do want to go through and cut off the seed heads as much as you can, especially for your own plants. So that's part of the process. That's in that overly complicated diagram that I got you. You can go on the website and they have a bunch of purple loosestrife guides and other things that I can direct you to as well if you want to ask me for the guidebook for how to do this stuff, because I know that it's pretty intense to look at this diorama, but it does give you. We can all stare at this now while we ask questions. This might prompt some more action here. So there's a bunch of stuff and details. Now, a lot of this is actually set for the northern climate. So I find that I'm like a month ahead because we're in a zone warmer than a lot of people up north. So these are especially the timing is not quite what you would necessarily do. It's going to be based upon the season. So yeah, more details here. So for each one of those potted plants, you want to have at least 10 beetles, 8 to 10 beetles that have a net around them. So that's the production style as you collect. So if you have, most sites are going to have 10 plants, so you're going to want to go out and collect 100 beetles. And if you have them in separate vials because you're aspirating them in there, then you can just, each vial you can release into a net and then seal them back off. Also for tips and tricks, so when you got these things up here, you have a line like this, or often I found too, so we use our volunteers, the Keens, to do this, and tying them off with hair ties on the top of the nets is super useful. Just regular like ponytail ties, and then a bit of string to tie them to the wire. Just a little tip that I found that really made my life easier versus trying to tie a bunch more knots or use duct tape to seal off the beetles, because the beetles are sneaky and want to get out to the best of their ability. Okay, question from Shelby. Okay. Wondering if she's seen beetles controlling the population, then dying off, and then the loosestrife recolonizes. And she's saying that the Forest Service has seen this happen, and that it's right, that it works great in rights of way area as well. So yes, I think that is the pulse of the periodicity of the beetles. So unfortunately, we have so much source seed coming in, so they're going to be able to find fertile soil for seeds. If they're in the region, there's going to be always an input of seeds. And if one area has biocontrol and knocks down that, and especially if there's that follow-up integrated pest management that goes to do more, better slide here. If you got here's my IPM slide. As things come back, you're going to find yourself along this wave of different types of control. So, if you started with something that was a large population with high density, that you're wading into the sea trying to control these plants, and the beetles knock it down to small populations, all of a sudden that opens up integrated pest management options. So herbicide and cutting have become an option as well. So me and another coordinator were arguing that we would actually like to see the shovel moved over here as well, because in my mind, once you have high density, isolated versus small populations, they're probably maybe diggable, but there's, I guess, Depends upon how many volunteers you have. This is all very scalable based upon funding and access as well, as you can see. So if it's really, really mucky, you're going to have to do something else besides dig it out, because you just can't even get around there without a fan boat. So people spend whole seasons just in boats with pitchforks going around with digging forks and getting them out of edges of soil and stuff like that up north. Around here is a lot thicker soil, a lot more root mass, so harder to do with mechanical control versus, I think, maybe the northern climate. Different soil types and all that. Yeah, the beetles and rights of way is definitely an interesting thing to think about. Because they like that open interface and kind of the wet and dry bioswales, and they're hardy. They can outcompete a lot of other things, so they do manage to grow on those rights of way. So raising beetles for that can be good. Yeah, we're never going to really get rid of the species entirely. And that's why it's restricted, because we're kind of in a long-term fight with it to keep it from spreading too aggressively by using these beetles. But unfortunately, we're never going to. Well, I guess I don't want to be a zealot about it. We're not trying to reduce ourselves to this pre-settlement times or be a purist about. It's all about, as opposed to what, making sure that we can do the spots that we can with the tools that we have and protect the sacred areas and by high biodiversity. But we're not going to get every one of them, and that's okay. Okay, Robert says he's seen reports that Region area grass may benefit by purple loosestrife management. I know you are also working on Region area grass management. What are your thoughts on managing multiple invasive species in the same habitats? Sure. I think that's true, because Region area grass thrives in the same exposed bits of wetland that you're going to see these plants otherwise. If you remove a shade structure for them, the Region area grass is going to grow more vigorously, right, and probably fill out that hole. And they've got a lot of seed mass there, so they're kind of pushing each other back. I guess I'd rather see diversity, and invasive species biodiversity is still biodiversity. It's not high quality or necessarily good biodiversity, but I'd still rather have multiple things than just one thing, with the idea that that's going to be maybe better habitat for insects and birds and whatnot. So it's hard to say, when, especially on the other side, when you're pulling out native red cedar from the side of of an oak savanna, those are both native plants, right? You're saying that they're competing with each other. It's having a long-term idea of how you finish out the cycle is probably the best thing to do, which is to say, if you just dig, you want to have a positive response with purple loosestrife control. Ideally, by reducing that, you are making more space available. But if the only thing that's going to move in is this other negative plant, then that might not be the side that you'd want to go and make that fight anyways, because that's the biodiversity in that area is already highly impacted, and you'd be better spending your time doing that same work in a wetland that has just a few scattered spots. And the idea of taking out a few scattered spots on the edge of a high quality area versus wading into the highly impacted management and degraded sites is just a better management idea anyways. It's definitely very complicated, and having plantings and having seedings and things like that to follow up with restoration is always preferable, but also very expensive and time consuming. So it's hard to fund that on a large, on like a mini acre property. Ideal temperature for beetles to survive. They don't want to they kind of like it hot. They're from the same growing climate that it's like Eurasia pretty much. So it's a similar growing band latitude wise, maybe a little warmer. They seem to like warmer years, in fact. So last year, with a cold late spring, we didn't get a ton of growth on the plants, and then when they finally popped, the beetles popped, and the plants were smaller than they usually are, because it was kind of a cold spring. So they would prefer a great vigorous warm spring. They seem to pop around, it's, again, I'm not an expert on the timing of this. It seems to be about a month and a half past the final ice off freeze. So they seem to have some signals that they want to go, and when the beetles actually pop. So if you have an April dig where the ground is unfrozen, you're going to have a mid-May beetle release, and that's going to be site specific. So you want to do some scouting to see when they're out there. They can survive. I've been out collecting in 100-degree weather, and they're exothermic, so they on a warm day they're more active. On a cold day you won't see them as much. So for collecting beetles, if you're doing it in the rain or on a cold day, you won't see as many beetles. Versus a warm, hot day, they're just more willing to feed and fly around and whatnot too. So I think the warmer the better for them. But they're able to handle our climate pretty well. That's why they do a decent biocontrol and survive the winters through the freeze. There's other biocontrols, for example, for Japanese knotweed and other knotweed complex things that they would like to introduce, but the larva cannot survive winter here. So it's not viable at this time. So the fact that it is viable for our whole season cycle is pretty important for the process. Okay, is there a risk of reinvigorating the purple loosestrife population if the beetles die off too soon and don't make it to a second season? So this is actually an issue. So you do want to go back and make sure that you take care with your potted plants and dispose of them properly. So it's funny because you're growing invasive species to fight invasive species. The do no harm principle always comes first for these projects. Don't make big holes in the ground. Don't move species around on your own boots. And if you're trying to do something good, don't accidentally do something bad by leaving out another big vector. As far as if how the cycle works, yeah, that is the problem with the program in general, is that it's not a silver bullet when the beetle population collapses, but then there's 7 years of viability of the seed in the seed bank, and then there's a flood event, so it does come back. And I make sure to take a loppers to the tops of my plants when I put them out there, and you can go and do a bunch of seed head reduction and just kind of fight it that way as well. So making sure that you do the due diligence to make sure that you're not a vector or adding more energy to the population, the seeding population, is very important.
Matt, this is kind of a follow-on to one of Doug's questions when he raised the question of stormwater, stormwater habitats, and one of the things that I'm really interested in terms of invasive species is, I certainly appreciate and support the idea of trying to manage them in habitats where they are. And I'm also maybe even more interested in trying to prevent them from getting into new habitats. And it seems like flooding and stormwater systems might really be worth taking a look at. And I know, like, from a town and municipality perspective, I'm really keenly interested in sort of future design of stormwater, both wet and dry detention. And so I think, and there's not really a question here, so I'll just say that it's more a reflection. But is, my hope is that as groups and scientists and managers, that we also look ahead to how can we prevent spread, how can we design habitats where purple loosestrife is less likely to take hold.
Yeah, and by managing stormwater in runoff events and having a good cohesive plan, you're going to make it so that the seed viability and, so watching the interconnectedness and knowing, so this is where reporting comes in. So which is something that we do with the EDMAPS protocol here, edmaps.org, or you can just send pictures to me. Getting things on the map does help us predict where things are going to move next. So as systems are designed with that in mind, or also I'm thinking that you could do a layer where you have these flood events, and if you had like a GIS basin idea with these high flood events and you had proximity to pioneer loosestrife colonies, you could then actually have a bit of a max extent that would be the new set of seeding possibilities that would make a high quality source area. So when we're trying to look for new infestations or kind of in general, with invasive species, you want to go and fight the invasive species in the pristine habitat and work from the edge back to the center. So back to that same idea of having multiple invasive species. If you can find a high quality wetland that just has a few of these plants and prevent it from spreading into that watershed, that's going to be a lot more valuable. Even if you cut just a few heads off or pull a few plants out of the ground, then as satisfying it is wading in with machete to like 100% density recanary gas and purple loosestrife stand. You're bailing out the sea versus trying to go and find a few ponds. I agree. Great questions. We still got time, folks. Anything else on your mind about any other slide you want to see, want to stare at for a long time? Let's see what else we got. I just couldn't say no to these dogs. Sorry. Here, this is a really good one too. So just looking at these little jelly bellies, these yellow larvae. I get to see them out in the field. They're pretty cool. So you can see active. I've seen sites that have. So, for example, Belleville, Upper Sugars had a project there for a while. And when I went back to dig the plants for the next year, I actually saw, in monitoring and doing classes, I saw larvae out there and beetles out there from previous years. So, and they were in fact keeping the population small. So it's amazing how they can manage to find a way to survive over the course of years. They kind of need a booster sometimes to get them going. I wanted to mention again the cages. This is just kind of a cool thing that we're doing. We're trying for the first time, that are apparently a bit of a bear to put up, but look pretty neat for efficiency. Let's see, there we go. So these are small ones. I think the one that we're going to have is going to be 12 feet by 12 feet and 6 feet tall. So it's going to be this big complex. So that's kind of a cool thing that you can get these donated from the DNR. They have a few kicking around, or you can buy them. You can do this mass rearing. So instead of having each plant in a net, you have one big net. So we're looking around, we're figuring out where we're going to put our big cage, and we've got the city of Madison buying us pipes to build it and volunteers to build it, and it'll be an interesting constructor set for our season. So something to think about if you have a huge project and you want a lot of beetles. All right.
Well, Matt, as we wind down, I want to put in a plug for anyone that's not real familiar with Upper Sugar to please go to our website. We've got a number of events like this. We've got lots of opportunities to participate in some interesting citizen science projects, different monitoring programs, and then also we're getting ready to launch a new strategic plan, which is sort of really ambitious on a lot of fronts, but I think especially new is broadening our reach in terms of education and outreach. And so if you're not a member, I encourage you to think about membership and just be aware of the events that we have. We're always looking for people to be on committees and help steer us in board positions. And I just like to thank everybody that was here tonight. But do please help us spread the word. Thanks.
Well said, Robert. Thank you for that. Other final thoughts? Well, I echo what Robert said. Thank you for taking the time to ask some great questions and join us to learn about this program. State sponsored by the DNR, and near and dear to my heart, so I get to go and dig plants out of swamps and raise beetles and say, "Fly, my minions, fly!" And they go and they do my bidding, and it is indeed a satisfying thing to see. So I'm gonna stop recording, and
thank you, Matt.
well, thank you, appreciate it.